Today I will be reading and reacting to your college football hot takes. Starting it off, Almighty Louise said that the 2018 Sooners would have won it all with Baker Mayfield. And I strongly disagree. I think that Kyler Murray could do a little bit more and add more factors than Baker Mayfield could during both of their Heisman seasons. I think that Kyler Murray, as a mobile quarterback with a strong arm, were able to make a lot more plays and be disruptive to those defenses. But I don't think that it really played too much of a factor between which quarterback was in that game. I think that the only way that the Sooners would have had a chance against that Alabama team and that Clemson team is if they had a much more physical offensive line and overall a better defense. The Alabama defensive line had an absolute field day with Kyler Murray that game. They were just way more physical than Oklahoma's offensive line, and Oklahoma did not have a great defense. And it showed in that second half against Alabama when Oklahoma started playing better offensively, but they just couldn't keep up with Alabama's scoring. And even if they did have a more physical offensive line or a little better defense, they weren't able to consistently make plays down the field on Alabama because Marquise Brown was injured and wasn't playing, and all they had was CD Lamb just by himself. So I disagree. I do think that they may have stood a better chance with a slightly better offensive line, a much better defense, and a third wide receiver that they could have counted on. Next up is Malik's NFL, and he said that talking about Cam Newton, is the GOAT college football QB. And I agree. I know a lot of people are going to point at Baker Mayfield, Tim Tebow, or Joe Burrow as the GOAT college football QB, and respectively so. But you got to realize Cam Newton did not play with any NFL talent that Heisman season. Just think about that. He ended up winning a Heisman, won a national championship, and went #1 overall with the team of dudes who are probably car salesmen right now. And I'm not trying to say that Auburn's team was just a bunch of scrubs that year, but you got to look at the guys that these other guys that you say are the GOATs. You got to look at what they played with. You had Joe Burrow, who had an entire NFL offense from offensive line to tight ends to running backs to receivers. So I do think that Cam Newton is one of the, if not best, quarterbacks in all of college football history. Next up is Capital Buckeyes, who says that Ohio State marches into Happy Valley and wins by 20. Now, when I originally put this out there for people to respond to, I thought you may have been tripping a little bit, and I'm a Buckeye fan myself, but I thought that was a little bit far-fetched to think that someone goes into Happy Valley and wins by 20. But with this team that Ohio State has constructed, I believe it. If this Ohio State roster can live up to what they should be able to do, I truly believe that they can go into Happy Valley this season and dominate. Kid President says that Arizona wins the Big 12, Ohio State wins the Natty, and UM drops off. I agree with the Ohio State part. I slightly agree with the Michigan part, and I now disagree with the Arizona part. I do believe that Ohio State will rise to the occasion this season and win a national championship. They have all the pieces. They have a solid quarterback. We'll see how he turns out. They have so much depth at running back. They have so much depth at receiver, and just talented all across the board. And their defense is going to be phenomenal. I do think they can win a national championship. As far as Michigan comes into play, they obviously will regress at least some. They're bringing in a whole new coaching staff. They might end up losing players. And that team that they had last season was just filled with 5th, 4th, and 6th-year seniors. So yeah, they're definitely going to lose a step. As far as Arizona goes, I do know that you wrote this take before all of the coaching changes were made and Arizona lost their head coach. And before then, I could have said, yeah, I think they can win it with Texas and Oklahoma leaving. But now, I think that it'll be such more of a harder fight for them to end up getting to the top of the Big 12 this season. So I'm going to go ahead and disagree with that part. Top Chef Lil Ryan said, Alex Orgy season loading. And I disagree with this. But when you look at it, there's a path. Let's put ourselves in a world that Alex Orgy has the talent to be a Heisman winning quarterback. They have the pathway to make that happen. If he were to have a big game against Oregon, have a big game against Washington, and have a big game against Ohio State. And that's just naming a few teams. You still got to throw in Texas that they will be playing. If Alex Orgy were to have Heisman level game against just those 4 teams alone, that puts him in the Heisman finalist conversation for sure. But overall, I disagree. I just don't think it will happen. Just Two-Tone said that no point in playing the 2024 season because Ohio State is building a super team. And as an Ohio State fan, myself, I like this, but I can't fully agree with it because games aren't really played on paper. We still have to play this season. There's still going to be tons of things that's happening. You got to remember that you got teams like Texas retaining 70% of their roster. Georgia retaining the majority of their roster. They're coming back. You still have to get past Michigan. You have to get past Oregon. I think this will be a very long season, but I do think that Ohio State is going to win a national championship next season. And finally, Bobby Stand On Business 51 said that Michigan won't be a top 15 team by the end of the season. And I disagree. I think that they'll be outside of the top 12 by the end of the season. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. If they, just looking at their roster, they've got to play Texas, they've got to play Oregon, they've got to play Washington, they've got to play Ohio State. I feel like if they lose at least 3 of those games, they have 3 losses. And if one of those games aren't particularly close, that could put them around the 10 to 15 spot. With the 12-team playoffs, you're going to have more teams getting in, and you're going to have a little bit of a bigger threshold for messing up, for losing the game. But I don't think they'll fall outside of the top 15 because they'll still be able to pick up some of those wins along the way. I do think, however, that if this team doesn't finish better than 8-4, going forward, they could be outside the top 15 because they weren't landing recruits when they were competing for national championships and making it to the playoffs. So how are they going to land these recruits when they're going 8-4? That is it for college football hot takes. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And comment down below your college football hot takes to make it into part 2.